Don't forget to go to ashkicking.com for pound the best home health and beauty fragrance products.
Hi, I'm Bobby Dean, and you're watching Dante's Boxing Nation. Boxing Nation.
And the beat goes on. Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So ever since Canelo Alvarez failed this PED test twice in February, getting suspended by the Nevada State Athletic Commission, and being forced to pull out of this Golovkin rematch, Canelo has created a snowball effect, and it is pulling Golovkin down with him. So since Canelo pulled out of this fight, of course, Team Golovkin, they've been scrambling for a replacement opponent. Now you would think, how hard can it be to find a good replacement opponent that actually deserves a shot at Gennady Golovkin's titles? Guess what? Problem solved. At least logically problem solved, I should say. Because the guy you're looking at right here on the screen, this is Gennady Golovkin's #1 mandatory IBF challenger. Once again, I want to reiterate, not only is he the #1 contender, but he is the mandatory. In fact, he is up next when it comes to mandatory rotation. IBF mandatory. The last time Golovkin faced his IBF mandatory was 2 years ago when he knocked out Dominic Wade. Now, the #1 IBF mandatory is this guy right here, Sergey Derenyevchenko. This man is an Olympian. He's a Ukrainian Olympian ratio, and he also was the bronze medalist in the World Amateur Championships. He's a pretty good fighter. So you would think Golovkin needs a replacement opponent. This guy is already the mandatory. If he doesn't fight this guy, he risks losing his IBF belt. So you would think it's a no-brainer. Let me go ahead and fight my mandatory, just like I fought my mandatory 2 years ago when it comes to Dominic Wade, right? But guess what? That's not what Golovkin wants to do. Instead of facing the #1 contender, Sergey Derenyevchenko, they want to fight this guy. Now, for those of you guys who don't know who he is, this is Venice Martirosyan. Venice Martirosyan is not even a middleweight, guys. He is a junior middleweight. Oh, but it gets much better than that. Because you see, while Sergey Derenyevchenko is the #1 mandatory, this super welterweight, Martirosyan, is not even ranked in the middleweight division. On top of that, he hasn't fought in over 2 years. On top of that, his last fight, he lost. So he's coming off of a loss. He's a junior middleweight, and he's not even ranked in the middleweight division. Now, and I ask you guys a rhetorical question. How does that make sense? That Martirosyan deserves a title shot before the #1 contender, Sergey Derenyevchenko, deserves one. Now that's a rhetorical question, right? How does that make sense? But you know what's so funny that I say this? Because Golovkin's promoter, Tom Loeffler, those were the exact words that he used. To the contrary, he tried to explain why it did make sense for Gennady Golovkin to fight Venice Martirosyan. Here's what Tom Loeffler had to say about this whole situation. Venice has expressed interest. He is training, He is local in LA, so for a number of reasons, he would make sense. But there are, trust me, I've been in contact with so many people. There are other people that are interested. Like I said, I've been in contact with Lou, and we'll see what we can work out to make the best of this situation, end quote. Okay, so just in case you guys didn't catch it, Tom Loeffler believes the reasons why Venice Martirosyan makes sense as a replacement opponent for Golovkin. The first reason was, he said Venice has expressed interest. So if that's the case, we have to remember fighters like Demetrius Andrade, fighters like Sergey Derevyanchenko, they've also showed interest. In fact, Sergey has shown so much interest that they are threatening to strip Golovkin of his IBF belt if they don't get the fight next. So they've showed more interest than Venice Martirosyan has shown. That was the first reason Tom Loeffler said the fight makes sense. And then he said he's training. That's another reason why it makes sense for Golovkin to take the fight. Do you guys know how many fighters? I'm talking about lions, sharks. Do you know how many fighters have expressed interest in fighting Golovkin and they're training on top of all of that? But once again, according to Golovkin's promoter, this is why it makes sense for Golovkin to not fight his number one contender and fight a junior middleweight who's not even ranked in the middleweight division. Something else I wanted to touch on is towards the end of the piece, Tom Loeffler, he also said, we've been in contact with Lou and we'll see what we can work out to make the best of this situation. Now, when he says Lou, he's referring to Lou DiBella. That's Sergey Derevyanchenko's promoter. So what he means is he's trying to work out a deal to basically stall them out so that they can fight someone like Venice Martirosyan, Gary O'Sullivan, Jaime Munguia, or one of these fighters, right? But the question is, if you're trying to make the best of this situation and you already have Sergey's promoter on the phone, why aren't you trying to work a deal with him? Why aren't you guys trying to negotiate a deal with Sergey? It's not adding up. It's not adding up at all. In fact, I remember when Golovkin was negotiating a deal with Chris Eubank and negotiations fell apart, Kell Brook, he stepped up. Remember, Kell Brook is a welterweight. Kell Brook was willing to jump, he did. Kell Brook moved up, jumped up 2 weight classes, and he said, I'll fill in and I'll fight you, Golovkin. Golovkin took that fight with no hesitation. So now in this situation, you have Demetrius Andrade, you have Sergey Derevyanchenko. They have all said, I'll step in just like Kell Brook did. But this time, Golovkin, he rejected their proposals. So what's the difference from Andrade? What's the difference from Andrade and Derevyanchenko versus Kell Brook? The difference is Kell Brook was a welterweight. And Andrade and Sergey Derevyanchenko, they are middleweights. Well, at least Andrade, he just moved up to middleweight. But this is not making any sense. So you're telling me Golovkin, he would prefer to fight a junior middleweight who's not even ranked as opposed to fighting the number one middleweight contender. How does this make any sense, guys? And what makes this look even worse is you guys have to remember, Erislandy Lara, you guys remember when Erislandy Lara was calling out Golovkin? He had called him out for like 2 years. You have fans trying to say, hey, he's never fought at middleweight before. Beat somebody at middleweight before you get a shot. You need to move up to middleweight before you fight Golovkin and fight someone, right? Venice Martirosyan fights at 154 just like Lara did. Matter of fact, Venice Martirosyan, he also moves around the ring. He's a boxer. So if this is the case, how come Lara didn't get a shot at Gennady Golovkin? I remember Abel Sanchez said to me on a couple interviews, he said Jamal Charlo doesn't deserve a shot. He said, who did Jamal Charlo fight at 160? But yet, Golovkin is considering Venice Martirosyan, who fought no one at 160. But yet, Jamal Charlo has already knocked someone out, but forget about that, he's another #1 contender for one of Golovkin's belts. I'll take it even further. I can almost guarantee you that Danny Jacobs and Charlo, who already have fights scheduled, I can guarantee you they would have gladly pulled out of those fights so that they could replace Canelo Alvarez and fight Golovkin. No doubt about it, they would have replaced him. So you have Andre, Sergey, and then you could also throw in Charlo, Danny Jacobs. And Golovkin wants to fight against who? Venice Martirosyan. While you have fighters like Deontay Wilder fighting the most dangerous heavyweight in the division who's not a champion, Luis King Kong Ortiz. You have Terrence Crawford challenging Errol Spence. You have Errol Spence willing to fight everybody and their mama. You have the Charlo brothers taking on all challengers, all comers, from Erickson Lubin to Julian J. Rock Williams, etc., etc., etc. You have Andre Ward, who moved up to 175 to fight the biggest, baddest man, Sergey Kovalev at the time. Didn't even have to do that. While you have all of these fighters challenging themselves, Gennady Golovkin is trying to fight Jaime Munguia and Venice Martirosyan. Now you would say, hey, but Dante, you have to understand, it's because Canelo pulled out. Since Canelo pulled out, that's why he's fighting these guys. Okay, Canelo pulled out, so why aren't you fighting your #1 contender? Why aren't you fighting your #1 contender? Usually, fighters are using the #1 contender excuse as a reason to fight them. Because matter of fact, Abel Sanchez used to always say this to me in interviews that we did. He used to always say, well, you know, we had to fight Willie Monroe. He was our contender. We had to fight Andrew. We had to fight Dominic Wade. So now, when it comes to a point where you have to fight Sergey Derevyanchenko, you have to fight Jamal Charlo, why aren't you fighting them now? We'll see how this all plays out. But right now, this is not looking good for Golovkin. In fact, there have been a lot of reports saying that there's a very, very good chance that we can get an announcement that this whole May 5th card will just get canceled. Because it's only 3 weeks away. Golovkin still doesn't have an opponent. And they don't have time to promote the fight in 3 weeks. HBO suspended promotion for the Canelo fight once they found out that he had tested positive and got suspended. So this whole card is just all messed up. It's all messed up. And then you're gonna fight, or you're planning on fighting Venice Martirosyan at the StubHub? It makes no sense. There's no way you can make sense of this situation. Only thing that would have made sense is if Golovkin would have did the same thing he did when he fought against Dominic Wade, was defend his titles and fight his #1 contenders. Boy, it's going to be interesting to see what Golovkin does in the next year. Because clearly, you know, the safe bet is to fight Canelo once, you know, they figure out what they're going to do when it comes to the suspension on the 18th. But after Canelo, where does Golovkin go? I'm telling you guys right now, the man is not going to fight Charlo. He's not going to fight Charlo. And this is one of those predictions. I pray to God I'm dead wrong, because that's what I want to see. I don't believe Golovkin will fight Charlo. I don't believe he's going to give Danny Jacobs a rematch. But anything is possible. HBO, the only way we're going to see those fights, guys, the only way we're going to see Golovkin against Andrade, Charlo, Jacobs, the only way we're going to see those fights, guys, is if HBO steps up, they step in, and they say, enough is enough, Golovkin. We want to see you fight the best fighters at middleweight. That's the only way we're going to see those fights. All of those fights, even BJ Saunders, is an extremely difficult fight. That's an extremely difficult fight for Gennady Golovkin to win. BJ Saunders looked extremely impressive in that David Lemieux fight. He's tall, he's physically big, he's a southpaw. And that's something else. Speaking of southpaws, that's something else I wanted to touch on. Golovkin, he excluded fighters like Andrade and BJ Saunders because he said, whoever we fight is not going to be against a southpaw. Right? But see, this is what doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand this. Golovkin is a fighter who went to the Olympics. This man, Golovkin has 300, 400 fights as an amateur? Golovkin was used to going into tournaments not knowing if his opponent in the finals or semifinals was going to be conventional, orthodox, or southpaw. But let's take it even further. Let's say your opponent you're about to face on May 5th, he knows you don't want to fight a southpaw. So what if he starts training, for 3 weeks as a southpaw? What if he was originally a southpaw and he was converted into an orthodox fighter? So he can always go back and forth, southpaw, orthodox style. What if that's the case? What if you still go in there with a guy who fights you southpaw for 12 rounds or however long it lasts? What are you going to do? Are you going to say, wait. I signed a contract to fight an orthodox fighter, not a southpaw. It would be too late for you to pull out of the fight. So you should be prepared for anything. You should be able to adjust on the fly with the level of experience that you have. Let's see what happens. Let's see if Golovkin gets his wish and he gets Venice Martirosyan in there as an opponent, or he gets Gary Spike O'Sullivan as an opponent. Let's see what happens. Or even Jaime Munguia, which was a fighter that even the Nevada State Athletic Commission, even they rejected him as an opponent because they felt it was too much of a mismatch. But you got to remember, this was in Nevada. Now the fight may be in LA, so we'll see what happens. But that's